Welcome, and in this lesson, we're going to talk about AWS deployment services as they relate to the CSA exam. First, let's take a look at Amazon Elastic Beanstalk. Amazon Elastic Beanstalk is a service that allows us to deploy out automatically specific AWS resources. It gives us an easy-to-use interface. A lot of times, this is used for developers who need to deploy out applications but don't have the need for architecting complex infrastructures or the knowledge. So it's easy to deploy complete application deployments automatically. It integrates with the Elastic Load Balancer, auto-scaling, EC2, and additional AWS services, which we'll cover in this course, and even provide examples and walkthroughs for using Elastic Beanstalk. Key benefit is for developers who are building applications but do not have the technical knowledge for building application environments. It includes basic configurations such as web applications and worker instances we can use for multi-tiered applications. It even now has support for Docker container deployments. So with Elastic Beanstalk, we can easily deploy out dev, test, QA, production, or any other arbitrary environment with the EB command line tool, which integrates with Git repositories. For example, if I wanted to submit my application code inside of a dev repository and build out a dev environment that deploys out the dev code, I could easily do that with the EB command line. If I then wanted to deploy out a test environment, we could commit it to our test branch and deploy out a test environment. And same thing with production. So whenever we committed our code to our production environment, it could either deploy out a production environment or deploy out the code to our already existing production environment. Next, let's talk about Amazon CloudFormation. Personally, I really like Amazon CloudFormation. It's one of my favorite because it's one of the funnest to work with. It's a really cool core component, and it really kind of defines the keyword infrastructure as code. It makes it really easy to use. So everything in AWS is an API, and it's accessible through an SDK. An SDK like Java, PHP, Ruby, Python, Node.js, iOS, Android, .NET. You can access it via command line tools or the console. But CloudFormation is a tool that allows you to code your infrastructure using JSON-like scripting and deploy resources based off of a pre-built template. We can build this template that says build out virtual private cloud, give it a subnet, assign it this CIDR IP address, create this SQSQ, fire up this EC2 instance. We can script it all in JSON. So what does that do for us? Well, it allows us to take our environment and create an entire backup of it just by a piece of code. So this gives the advantage of easily backup and disaster recovery, and also allows us to version control our AWS infrastructure. Because it's code, we can store it inside of a Git repository and have different versions of that infrastructure. For example, with a template and the template code, you could build out EC2 instances that belong to an Elastic Load Balancer, and also create the Elastic Load Balancer inside of this JSON template. We can create an Route 53 resource and assign it to our Elastic Load Balancer, all with our JSON template. Building CloudFormation templates are outside of the scope of this certification, but we will go into great detail how to do it inside of AWS Developer and other linuxacademy.com training material. We will have some basic CloudFormation template building. What we need to understand is why and how and when to use CloudFormation. So let's take a look at this here real quick. This is an example of a CloudFormation template. I'm creating a VPC resource that creates a VPC inside of AWS. It creates a subnet, assigns it a specific CIDR range. Do not get overwhelmed. This is not a service that we have to use right away. This is a service that we'll gradually dive into. I just wanted to show you an example of how we can deploy out an environment and version control an environment all with code. So if AWS were to run this, it would actually automatically create your private subnet and make it accessible inside of your environment. So that concludes it for this lesson. Go ahead and complete this lesson.